Oh, why? We finally got it. That's a wrap, guys.
That's a wrap. That's it. That's the end of the video.
Well,
it was a 3-second video.
We
you
had
got
hubris and thought we had done some good things, and then it was garbage.
Yeah. So we're still learning, as are we all.
Learning to love myself.
Please don't do that.
The video's not actually playing, which concerns me. I think this is perhaps during our startup phase.
We probably were doing the
We're
similar
dubbing
thing
a
that we're
capture
doing
because
now.
the audio was glitched last
Well,
week.
I wouldn't say glitched. It was just
It was poorly conceived.
Is this me or
playing,
you
but
that's
it's not
doing
moving.
the weird massive peaking in the middle of nowhere?
Peakery.
Peakery.
Who's peaking?
Peakery. See the weird, like, just massive.
Was that you getting close to the
entrails?
mic?
No. It's
me. Yeah, that's me. I think it's. I did notice that the weird gain setting, does have a tendency where it's like.
It all of a sudden
it
lets it
lags
through.
slightly
Oh no!
where-
See, that's doing it to me too. It's
Well,
like pop.
that did seem to be an issue of the audibility, where it's like once it does cross the threshold of this is loud enough for the mic to capture it, it like almost compensates by getting too loud all of a sudden. But I'm afraid that's a better issue to deal with than the issue we were dealing with, which was garbage
Well,
quality.
you can probably
Now the video's playing, so
you
that
can
took a long
probably
time.
do what's called in post edit. It is called
I would just add a compressor.
normalize. You normalize it will actually bring everything kind of closer together. It's similar to
that's not what normalize does in DaVinci. I would have to actually add a manual compression because normalize
is that
that's
what
the
you
name
use?
of yes, because it's a free software.
Huh.
But basically, because to normalize basically means I want you to take the average of this clip and just set it so that the average is this, but that will not squash the peaks. It'll just average and then set, here's what the average volume is, and so we're going to boost it or retract it until the average is that, but the peaks and troughs will still be in it.
Well, they'll be lessened, I suppose.
No, you're thinking compression is what you want, and that's not what maybe that's what a normalizer should do, but that's not what the normalizer not Audacity, in DaVinci does. I would have to manually add a compression, which I do anyways, because I want consistent volume anyways. I basically make it as flat as it can be, where it's like, we're talking and it just gets whatever. It's weird to be off duty in a way. I can just watch previous me play, although previous me isn't playing. I'm leaning too close into my mic. I found that I liked it last week having the mic nice and close. I'm having to sit slightly further back due to budget cuts.
They're making him we unionized to make you sit further back. That was a part of the stipulation.
Dear Phil, do not pinch us. Don't poke our eyes out.
What?
It's so old. It's so weird. It's an old Mel Blanc joke that's very funny, but very strange. I don't know when we actually start playing. This is weird that I feel like I'm trying to get into my previous headspace.
Well, that's a good deep dive into what you ought to be doing. If you haven't,
you're entering a depression zone.
If you have not gotten into your own headspace, you should.
Sure. Now the question is, when did I do the reveal of my excellent character creation? Because
oh yeah, we did.
It's going to be somewhat lessened by the fact that
I'm just going to pretend like I don't know.
Just pretend that you never saw
is.
this. You
Exactly.
probably were asleep anyways.
Wow.
This is the first time you'll have seen this.
Well, the setup at this point is similar to NPR, so I might as well just talk like NPR because at this point I will put myself to sleep. I swear, when you get into like those late night, when you're driving home, how is that the time frame in which they decide to do those kinds of, hey, we're playing classical station?
Well, that does make sense because
it
at
doesn't.
night,
It's like you
if
want
you're so
like something
tired
to
that
keep
you're
you up.
Well, no, because that's what like morning radio is. That's why morning radio is so loud, is because it's meant to be like, hey, you're probably still half asleep, but you got to wake up. You got to wake up on the interstate.
Work, bud.
Hey, it's the Deathly Pallor coming at you from 99.02 FM, The Sturge. Coming up next, we got some hot new tracks. Somebody do Hey Who. Don't ever do that again. That hurts more than it used to.
Sponsored to you by Folgers, because no one drinks that crap anymore.
If I ever reach a point in my life when the best part of waking up is Folgers in my cup, I don't think I want to wake up.
I will say though,
Mike Birbiglia.
those tin cans when as a kid were great.
I don't know why I thought you were going to say something different. because you said tin with such emphasis.
Okay.
By the way, those tin cans. I'm gonna have to restrict myself from like leaning in because
Well,
I feel like I want to involve you all very closely.
Cans, I suppose,
you
still
all to feel it.
Cans, I suppose, still kind of works.
She's got tin cans. See a doctor.
She's got electric boobs. I'm just playing. But at the same
when
time,
do I reveal my greatness?
That's
not a question about the game, actually. It's just I'm pontificating. When should I do that?
When should you reveal your character?
Counselor Troy, when should I reveal my greatness?
just in general, when I ought to unearth my full potential on the world.
It's very strange because I feel like I didn't realize we dawdled so much at the beginning.
Dawdled.
There's like so much bumbling around. I want to see my
Fiddly
glorious
bits.
character.
Well, I think at one point I mentioned to you that there is a third person that you go into by accident.
I
I'm like,
deliberately,
what is the...
I deliberately wanted to make
was
it a reveal
deliberate.
because I knew you would appreciate it. I just didn't realize it took us so long to get to it. I am better prepared because at least last week, when I tried to get into a discussion of like why Bethesda fell from grace, I didn't have any stuff like. I didn't have any actual knowledge at hand.
Unfortunately,
and you were useless.
that is still the case. I do not know.
I have at
enough
least
about
done a little
Bethesda.
bit of research since I knew we were going to have to re-record this. I was like, hey, I might as well actually know a thing or two. But
So, do you have a actual purpose in why Bethesda fell from grace? Because I would.
It's not purpose. I mean,
well, but I'm saying like,
I
is
have an
there
analysis. I
actual-
think of why. Yes.
Is there an actual reason?
It does.
Because
I do think that there are a couple concrete.
Is it a good excuse or is it just an excuse
Well, it's not
nonetheless?
well, there's no excuse for falling from grace.
I agree. There you go. Bethesda, that's the short answer. No excuses.
I think I'm about to do it because I think I chose deliberately to get the good lighting, which is what I'm setting up. And I did learn in the post that I do actually have the mods that I had downloaded for like the graphics overhaul were already activated at this point. I wasn't sure in the original video. I don't know why I'm bringing up the original video because no one would know that this wasn't live if we just pretended, except for the fact that we probably wouldn't be good enough at pretending.
What do you mean? You're talking about like
downloaded some mods 'cause-
running it over?
No,
overclocked,
there's a couple texture, like they basically make the whole game prettier. And I was like, hey, I've got a nice beefy PC. I want my games to look pretty.
He's got a nice beefy PC, and then we
And
also play
electric
games
moves.
on a. And then we also play games too.
This is taking so bloody long.
In this case, PC does not mean computation machine. He's talking about his personal. I was gonna go someplace else with
Personal cans.
but it just ended up
That
lending
is my
itself.
personal and private supply of tin cans. And you're not to touch them.
Well, wasn't everybody's grandpa
That's
like
what I'm-
that with their Folgers cups?
Oh, see, I thought it wasn't everybody's grandpa's like that.
With their tin cans?
Don't go touching grandpa's tin cans. That's what I'm going to say whenever I'm rich and I have like a giant garden full of statues and be like, this is my private collection of tin cans. Don't touch them. There we go.
What does that have to do with anything?
Well, because I like a certain kind of statue.
Okay, but they're not tin.
No, but I mean, they're cans.
Sure.
There's cans on display. Anyways, I think I'm about to reveal the glory of my main character.
Your youth.
Well, he's not exactly youth. He's a bit the worse for wear, actually.
The glory of his youth will
Good
be
grief, how long has
restored.
this been? Been almost 10 minutes, and we've been sitting around the vault looking at the danger
Well,
sign.
we do digress.
We really don't be doing.
quite often, so it's not an uncommon occurrence.
Well, we have only ever actually done these post. It's funny, now we have done more non-game recordings than post-game recordings. It's like we
That's
either
because we
either
are
capture
slowly
live or
getting
we give
all-
up on the pretense.
We're slowly giving you guys an understanding that really it's just a podcast.
We don't give a crap.
and we give zero craps
In fairness,
about
we
the,
broadcast that
about the
fairly
B-roll.
early.
if you're here and you're thinking that the actual game has ever been the
it's
main
a weird. I'm having a weird
focus,
relational thing where it's like I keep wanting to get close to the mic, but then I can't because that's
know-
what causes because my mic is inferior and it.
I'm getting my Counselor Troy hat on and wondering whether that's
Because I
actually
have more
is that representative of your relationships
Actually,
in
it's
general?
because I'm closer to machines than I am to real people.
But I mean,
Here's me.
you find yourself
Check me.
wanting to get close, but
Check
not,
me
but keeping your
out.
distance. Check me out. Bah, bah, bah. Check. It is Arthur Shelby in the flesh. That is who it is.
Old Testament.
Oh.
I did make him a little bit uglier than he needed to be.
It's the grizzled kind of weird,
The weird, like, cheek.
cancerous.
Well, because that was, I mean, they had like the sort of, you know, what's his name? The Danny Trejo face.
But
And I was like, well, that fits.
Danny Trejo.
I was like, it fits. But,
Wow.
and they actually, I do think that they had a sensitivity slider where it's like, I could have made it less pronounced, but I don't think I noticed it at the time.
You just cratered his son of a gun face.
I mean, he's a mobster who's seen some better days. So it makes
I think
sense,
I made
but-
the comment that in the Fallout, you know,
in the
motif,
Fallout.
it would make sense.
I think this is when I take a look at us. Well, yeah, we said something about in a post-apocalypse, joining or starting a gang probably is the most logical thing to do.
Yeah, you were talking about. The,
here's
the whole
here's
Arthur
politics for the
being-
week. It was actually on a political
Someone
podcast.
did something.
that I
That's
was-
politics.
Yeah, that does happen. But someone made the great case, and I was like, because it was a conservative podcast taking, shall we say, casting shade at the state of California right now. And they just said, you know what really should do? If you're, you know, a budding entrepreneur, go to California and just start a private security company. Because you'll make bank. Because basically what they're saying is like, because they're now criminalizing.
I'm not following.
Oh, have you not heard the news? Where it's basically they previously decriminalized petty theft, where it's like as long as it's less than $1,000, they're not going to prosecute, which is absurd. But now, any store that does prosecute like privately, they now face a fine. So they're literally decriminalizing crime and criminalizing the stopping of crime. So someone was like, you know what's going to happen is
It's literally racketeer. Like somebody could make a.
oh, that's what the podcast was saying.
Racketeering-wise,
Is
it's
like
like,
go
that's-
to California and basically start a mob, start a protection racket, and be like,
Okay,
hey,
so
you
why
won't-
are we not doing this?
This is what I
This is
suggested.
what you and I are gonna
This is
do.
what I was saying. It's like we go to California and just start a protection racket. Be like, hey, insurance isn't going to cover you because of this area, but hey, you pay me half insurance. I'll be here. I'll have some guys stationed at your door.
That's craziness.
Seriously, I'm like, just make it private police. You'll make bank.
That's.
I don't endorse.
have-
Well, no, I do actually endorse this within the letter of the law.
We don't endorse
I don't know
it.
what
Nobody
the letter
steal
of the
this
law
idea.
is
We're
in
doing
California, actually, but I'm not sure
Which
they have one.
podcast was this?
It
Because
was the Lotus Eaters, of course. I tell you every week that
yeah,
they
I-
say good things.
the problem is you're gonna get those weird. You're gonna get like the what is it called? The that really crazy Republican group that is out there.
Proud
Not the-
Boys?
What? Yeah. I mean, you're gonna get those types of people out there trying to do it, and it's
Are
like
they a problem?
I'm not saying they're a problem, but I certainly think that in order to pull off that as a mob racketeering gig, you need to have a bit less intact than that.
Oh, the Proud Boys.
They're
They're not Antifa. They've actually got at
I'm
least
not
a little bit
suggesting
more
that
of
they're
like.
Antifa, but they're certainly not.
They don't have class, I suppose.
They're a bit meatheady.
They're dude broy, yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, that's a quibble over personality. I don't think
that's
they'd be any
true.
less effective. I'm just saying, if you want to make a load of money in California, there's a market that's underserved called policing. So if you want to fill in the private police sector,
Sir, I have a feeling that that's going to be the case more and more by and large across.
well, the more dereliction of law. It's like, well, someone's going to enforce some kind of law. We liked the system we had because it was one group enforcing the law for everyone.
Well, and it's
Because the only other alternative is not lawlessness, because that never lasts. What the alternative is a bunch of small groups enforcing their own laws, which is just gangs.
you know, it's the whole. Well, yes, you're bad guys, but you are bad guys.
Well, I'm just saying, hey, even if you just went to California and was like, hey, I'm starting a private detective agency, where it's like, hey, the police won't investigate this crime, but I will.
I'll hunt that. I was gonna just get real.
Don't go.
Real grizzled. What is it? What's the
I don't think you're allowed to say that word.
noir kind of
Oh.
vibe?
I thought you were going to go with another word that starts with that letter.
You're talking about Oh, wow. No.
Well, you acted like you had to catch yourself.
No, I was saying I'm going to go hunt. I was going to say.
I'm just saying
else.
I'd do it if I lived in California, because there's an impulse in me to be like, I'm just leaving. And since there's other states that are sensible, yeah, probably the smartest thing to do if you're Californian is to just leave. But then
Well,
again,
the problem with
that's
that
a short-sighted
is
notion, because like the more
everyone
states
is coming
do that,
here.
it's like, well, yes, but it's also like, if that were to happen here, which is not as likely, but I mean, it's not impossible.
Everyone would just get their
The
ARs.
problem, well, yes, but I'm saying the problem is,
Oh, you're not going to do anything about that
But,
petty
like, that's
theft.
because
well,
I don't-
am.
but this is
Will
'cause
you
I
do
don't-
something about murder? Because if the answer's no,
'Cause
I think
but
we
here's
have
the
a
thing,
solution.
is I've never lived in California. I have no respect for it, so I'm obviously like, well, yeah, everyone should just leave. But like, if it happened
We
here,
spent
again,
an
it wouldn't likely
exorbitant
happen
amount
here.
of time looking around for your house.
Yes, we did. We spent. It's clear we spent a lot of time doing just absolutely
Bupkis.
nothing. But if it were to happen here, not that that's likely, but like in a hypothetical scenario where it were to happen here, like there's only so many states you can run to until they all just start doing this. So then, if it's a state about which you have some nostalgia and like, no, I don't want to just surrender it to the loons, then the answer is, okay, private security firm. Literally, all it is start handing out burner phones and be like, hey, the police won't come if you call them, but if you call me, I'll be here in 10 minutes. And, I mean,
I agree.
you're not allowed to carry in California anymore, but I mean, that's not going to stop everyone.
Well, I knew that they were going downhill at the point that they decided straws were considered a weapon. They were illegal, which is just...
That wasn't the reason. I thought it was because they hurt sea animals.
I'm sure that it was, but
I mean, anything's in
was
the weapon
some-
in the hands of Jason Bourne, but
Well, anything's
I
in
saw
the...
him kill a guy with a straw
Anything
once. I
can
don't
be
think anyone could
weaponized
manage
politically in California, apparently. But
it. Bugs.
it's vilified, I suppose, is a better term for
Well,
it.
I don't
It's
know.
just-
I'm just saying, like,
what I
if
find
you're a budding
fascinating
Texas
is-
entrepreneur with the right kind of temperament, I'd say load up on a bunch of legal weapons, legal in Texas. Think about a possible market where private security is perhaps about to boom. Travel there and just set up shop.
The interesting thing is,
And-
I actually have like resource-wise, I am not thin when it comes to people that I know that would actually be right up their alley.
You mean me?
Well, I'm saying you.
If I
but
had the money,
I'm saying, like, I have employees that are underneath me that have worked for, like, the cartels and the Mexican
they told you this, or are you
government.
implying this?
Yes, no. One of them literally said that he was offered to work with, because he used to work in Mexico, and he literally was offered to work with the president of Mexico, and he said, I literally got out because I said that this whole government system's corrupt, and I'm not interested in working here. He said he used to make...
that's not working for the cartel. He might have known some guys in the cartel.
That was a different guy. I'm talking...
The other guy actually is still in the cartel.
Well,
Hey, we found our old robot.
but I'm just saying that's...
I would.
Yeah.
The part of me that wants to do that is also restricted by the fact that I'm like, okay, well, it's not happening here. If it did happen here, I'd have far more reason, because to say I'm going to go to California, that's much more mercenary. And I wouldn't do it mercenarily. If it was my state that this was happening in, and I'd be like, okay, I'm not surrendering my state. We're getting Undercity on here.
Right. I mean, it's a bit like Ground Zero, my site kind of a thing.
Well,
but
I mean, I don't know. I'm not endorsing gang behavior. I'm just saying it makes sense.
it's certainly never been something that's... In my undergrad, I actually did a...
In my undergrad, I had to make some extra cash.
No, in my undergrad, I did a psychology study on why gang behavior is even a thing, and the way that...
If you go all the way back to this guy called Adam.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like mob mentality and really, to a more specific degree, organization of people groups around a particular idea really starts with people being mistreated and a people group saying, well, we're tired of that, so we are going to stand up for ourselves. And so it really comes from a place of positive things. It does for the most part.
I wouldn't say that it always does, because sometimes it's, hey, let's all make a load of cash.
No, most of the time, like for instance, especially with these low-level, like actual gang-banging type gangs, most of the time it's family that they want some sort of sense of belonging and that kind of thing, or it's protection. They go, I am in my specific city or area.
The belonging thing, implies that the gang was already there, though.
Correct.
That's not how a gang starts.
No.
A gang
correct.
starts either because you're going, hey, we're being oppressed, or
Correct.
I just want stuff.
9 times out of 10, it's because of oppression. On a psychological level, based on statistics, that's what the statistics back up. You can disagree, but that's what.
Like even the mob, like even the Italian mob, it's like
Okay, I'm not talking about
yes,
the mob.
they were.
Mob is organized crime is different to me than gang life.
No, because to me, organized crime makes more sense than street gangs.
True. I'm talking about my specific study.
Okay, so here's a weird thing that I've noticed.
Is that he looks like a skull right now?
Yeah, that didn't happen. That wasn't happening when we played the game. This wasn't until I watched the video back that I realized that was happening.
Is that screen tearing?
I have no clue what's causing it, because it was not doing it in the game. I would have noticed it for sure. And it has not done it in the game since I've been playing it. So I've never tried to record the game again. It might be a weird recording setting, or it might have just been part of the same glitching that was happening.
I can't get
all
over
the
how
place.
great Arthur Shelby looks in this particular environment.
Oh, I thought you were going to say in that particular suit.
Well, that's true too.
I tried to capture his. He was actually quite scrawny. Like he was more of a string.
Yeah, he is.
He was like real lean, but still jacked.
Well, the whole idea.
Not jacked. He was cut.
Yeah. Well,
But
the
he was
whole
very
idea
skinny.
is that it's not about the fact that he wins fights because do you even have the details of him having cauliflower ears? That's
Well, I mean, I tried. They are a little comical. I mean, I might have overdone it a little bit, but
I'm just saying, like, the notion that the reason he wins fights is not because he's the bigger or better fighter necessarily, as much as it is he's just got the
animal,
raw,
and he will come after me.
Yeah, exactly. It's the whole. You're gonna have to pay me double because if I kill Tommy, his brother is a freaking animal.
Now, there is one thing that I found funny, which is that obviously there are substances in the game you can use, which are like give you combat prowess. And one of them is basically just like a roid machine. And literally, whenever you use it, the guy, like the voice acted guy, literally is just like, bring it in like this super intense voice. And I'm just like, that's absolutely Arthur, isn't it?
Just as long as it's snow.
No, it's like, well, I mean, it's an injection.
In the show, obviously, but
I don't know what we're doing now. We're fiddling with stuff. This really was. I'm looking back at how totally. So what's the appropriate word?
Non-committal.
Not well put together last week was. Now we've got a double monitor set up so I can look at the recording and the video.
I am curious explain the whole Fall of Grace.
Well, yes, I guess we might as well.
We're gonna unpack this.
Well,
and find
as I
out.
was thinking about it, because they used
while
to be
you were thinking,
really reasonably well. Oh, is the video frozen or was this?
Nope. It's you making a decision. Probably what it is us checking the audio. And
Probably, yeah. Okay, that's what it was. That is the one thing that's a little bit paranoiaing. Is that I don't know what the thought process is, so when it freezes, I don't know why.
But when you...
Ooh. Oh, goodness, it's turning into Harvey Dent. I swear that wasn't happening in the recording, so I might have to look at when we try to record the next thing, that might be an issue I need to actually look at, but I didn't notice it in the game, so I don't think it was like the mods glitching out. Anyways, I mean, we made the comment, and I think it still holds true, that Fallout 76 was the nail in the coffin, but I actually think that was the point at which it was, like, irrevocable. I think the decline, some people would go as far back as to say the decline began with this game, actually, which feels like people...
Maybe a little premature.
Well, I think that's people in the future
Right.
sort of retroactively saying they have always been on the decline, whereas
correct.
this game was well received mostly.
Right. It was. And I think to criticize it is a little unfair.
There are things to criticize about it, and I do agree that it's not as good as Fallout 3, which is the last one that they made.
Again, I say I think
and
that's
it's
a little
certainly not as good as
premature.
New Vegas, which they didn't make.
Right.
So, but I would
What's wrong?
I do think that New Vegas is the trigger because essentially, I might as well, since I did the research, Bethesda bought the rights to Fallout and then made Fallout 3, which was well received. And then some people are even like, well, Bethesda's never really understood Fallout, and even Fallout 3 wasn't as good as the original 2 games. And I'm like, that's a hard sell. I've played the original Fallout a little bit. It's an old computer game from an era where only a certain kind of person would have wanted to play it because it's not very accessible. And some people, I think, take that to mean that, well, when they make it more accessible, it sucks. I'm like, that's not a universal.
No, that's very
That
true.
is a trend that does sometimes manifest, but it's not a universal. And I think Fallout 3, when it came out and for several years after, Fallout 3 was regarded as a great game. So I think that's people retroactively trying to say, no, Bethesda was just always bad. And it's like, I don't agree.
Agreed.
But then Obsidian, who was, now this is what gets weird, is that they claim to be the people who originally invented Fallout, which is technically true because they were founded by some people who left the original Fallout studio, which was called something I'm not going to recall. It was originally some studio that created the original 2 Fallout games, sold the rights. The original studio went under, and a couple guys formed Obsidian, who made New Vegas, which obviously everyone recognizes is the best of the modern Fallout games, and rightly so. And I think that's sort of when people went, oh.
I think it clicked for more of the wider audience.
Yeah,
at that
and I think
point.
it's more in keeping with the tone. Because we did comment this when we were playing this, is that the one issue I think Bethesda has is they try to make Fallout more serious than it originally was. Because Fallout was always a goofy, like the original Fallout games are goofy on purpose.
Yeah.
They're wacky. And I think this game is far more serious, and even Fallout 3 is also more serious than they're meant to be.
Yeah.
Like I made the comment that, in New Vegas, the motivation of you got shot in the head, so go ice that son of a gun. Yeah. It's like that's a Fallout appropriate motivation, whereas like, oh, I have to find my kidnapped infant. That makes it so that when a side quest that you want to do pops up,
right,
there's a dissonance in your head of like, well, obviously I wouldn't go and do this now because I've got an infant I'm trying to find.
Yes, I will help you tow your car, you freaking champion.
Like that's, yeah, it doesn't, there's a dissonance, whereas when your motivation is, oh, I'm just going to go shoot a guy, it's like, well, okay, I could take a break for a bit, do this quest. So I think their attempts at being serious are usually what let them down.
Swimming and strangle a guy. It makes as much sense to me.
But that's a sort of a minor thing about the quibble of like Fallout New Vegas. I think got the vibe of Fallout better. But the other thing that they did is, I don't know how true it is that they like were attempting to be spiteful. But basically, when Obsidian came along and was like, hey, can we make a Fallout game since we made the originals? They gave them like a very slashed budget and a very tight time schedule, and they still produced a much better game. And so I think that was the moment at which the fan base was like, oh, hang on, these guys are just genuinely better at making these games because they did it with half the resources, half the time, and still made a better game.
Yeah.
So it's like that, I think, is when people started to wonder, and then Fallout 4 came out and was not as good as New Vegas. And yeah. I would agree that it's probably not as good as Fallout 3 even. It was still, again, well received at the time, so I think it's somewhat retroactive to try and say that it was part of the descent. I mean, it was, but it wasn't visibly part of the descent at that point. I would say that the two things that constituted Bethesda's official, like, they're in the doghouse, was the paid mod sort of fiasco.
But that's always been a challenge for me when you kind of make it it's not even that I always expect games to be a single package kind of a thing.
That's not
as
DLC
much as it is
even. Like, yeah, DLC is a thing that I'm kind of leery of because sometimes it's great,
but I don't always hate it. That's the thing.
Well, no, but like here's the thing: there was even some scandal. It wasn't exactly scandal, but some frustration with this where they took a long time releasing the creation kit, which is essentially like, here's all of the assets for the game that may allow people to make mods easily. They took a long time to release it, And they specifically didn't release it until after some DLC had come out, which were essentially just game fixes. Like, because there's DLC, which is, here's an added bit of story.
Right.
And then there's DLC, which is like, here's a thing the game should have done, but it didn't do at launch, and now you're going to have to pay to make the game do what we said it was supposed to do.
Right.
That's kind of
where I take
That's where
issue.
people went, it's like, of course the reason they didn't release the creation kit until after that is because no one would have bought them, because the mods for these things would have already come out by the time you sold them.
Right. Right.
So that, I think, yeah, there's reasons to be skeptical of them and their business practice, especially and more over time. But the paid mods was when that was apparent, where they're just like, hey, you know, the love and dedication that our fans have for our stuff that manifests in the form of them adding more stuff for our games. Yeah, we don't like that's basically competition, because we feel that they're essentially doing a thing for free better than we do, and we charge for it, and that means people aren't going to pay us.
And unfortunately,
So they tried to scheme a way of like, hey, let's make it so that they can be sold, and then we can get a cut of it, and everyone. That essentially is just. It's not too extreme to say that that's kind of a betrayal of the fan base, which is sort of how it was received.
Correct. If that's always been your market, like for instance, Apple's a good example of. Now, I'm not saying Apple's done everything perfect, because right now Apple sucks, but...
Well, the whole open versus closed...
It's exactly. If you start your company with a knowledge that it's like, no, there is no... The fans don't contribute. They're not... The users do not participate. We do our thing, and you just receive it.
Well, and I was somewhat won over when I read the Steve Jobs biography. Not won over in that I agreed... But it's not nearly as corporate and greedy and awful as it is now, because his vision was essentially, we want to create, the highest end product that we can, which means we need to have this level of control over it, because we're not going to be able to make it as high quality if we don't have that control. And back in the day when they were actually making really high quality stuff, it's like, okay, well, that's part of the package. They say, we want the full control, but we're going to give you the best thing.
Correct. And
nowadays, they're not giving you the best thing, but they don't care because they have the control.
Correct.
That's the issue.
That is and that's chiefly, that is always the challenge, is that when you have and I think we brought this up the last time we played this in some other capacity, but
the dog or you?
No, the whole oligarchy kind of vibe.
I don't remember oligarchy being brought up.
What are you doing out here all by yourself?
You get into this notion of like, even if you start with the best intentions in mind, eventually control just makes you...
We're going to insult the dog. I remember that being a very Arthur thing to do.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, it's still in a loving way, but yeah, it's...
Exactly.
Okay, then.
Yeah,
Anyway.
so, I mean, again,
So anyway, I'm just saying, certain companies
a very
start that way.
contemptuous attitude to your consumers, because they could have been like, "Hey."
I think your initial statement about it being a betrayal is more accurate, because again, it's when you don't start your company that way and you have this kind of open share, we all participate in what we're doing kind of a vibe.
Because
and
that
then
could have
go,
been
screw you guys. We're gonna do
Because
our
when you
own
look
thing.
at when you look at the Nexus mods, like 4 of the top 5 most modded games ever have been Bethesda games.
Right.
Like, modding has been a part of their sort of culture. It's like Skyrim and Fallout 4 are the 2 most modded games ever.
Well,
And then Fallout 3, Oblivion, and Morrowind are sort of all in the top 10. Where it's like, this has been a part of their culture, and some people might say, well, it's been a part of their culture because they've always made janky games that the fans have had to fix. Again, I think that's retroactive. Not that it's not entirely true, because...
yeah, it's not.
I think
unfounded,
the jankiness of their games, and this is another thing that I think is worth discussing, but I suppose we'll get into it slightly after I conclude this. First thought is just that was a point of, it could have been the attitude, which was very reciprocal, and we love that fans love the games and they're going to add to it. We want to actually encourage this, because that's the best marketing, is just being nice people.
100%.
Like, I mean, I was thinking of, this is not exactly the same in terms of attitude, but it's like the fact that the original Doom is famous for being able to run on like everything. People have gotten it to run on like graphing calculators and the screens on digital fridges. And id are kind of cool with that. It's like, hey, isn't that fun that, 30 years after this game came out, it's still people still like it enough to go through all of this.
Well, and that's the proper
hubbub about
response.
it.
It's a bit of the axiom.
I also think it was Doom. It might have been Quake, but it was id who, for the 30th or 25th anniversary, it was either Quake or Doom, I forget, but they made both. They released a free set of like level expansions where it's like, hey, here's a celebration. We're just gonna. It's like that's what a community does.
Right.
That's what says, hey, we appreciate that all this time later you guys are still playing our game. So here's a bit of free stuff.
It's
fun.
the whole axiom of it's the sincerest form of flattery to what is it called?
Imitate?
Imitation. Yeah,
That's not exactly.
And I'm not saying like they're like the users are imitating, but it's in a
way.
a bit of the hey, we really like what they've done.
It says,
so
hey,
we're going
I like this game so much that I'm willing to put the effort in to make it even more custom to my desire.
Correct.
And you can either view that as like, well, that means it must not meet your desire, and that means you're wrong, or it's like, or you could look at the fact that they want, they could play a different game and mod it to be what they want, but they want your game to be that because clearly something about it speaks to them. That's a decent enough transition into, I think, the broader shift that I think has become apparent in the modern day is that Bethesda have always been broad and not very deep. And back in the day, breadth was impressive in computer games.
Now that's not the
Morrowind
case.
is janky as all get out, as we saw from playing it in the snippet that has already come out. We're actually going to hopefully capture that properly this time. But it's like, it's janky and old, but people didn't care as much about that back then because the sheer breadth of things you could do was impressive. But nowadays, breadth isn't that difficult. So
it's also not that important to the user.
You
I think
either have to inflate
shifted.
the breadth so much because modern technology, it's like modern technology makes, you could like, Morrowind's a gig. That was huge back in like whenever in the early 2000s, but like that's nothing today in terms of size, and yet it's still a fairly broad game, whereas like this, in order to get more breadth, you have to just keep pumping ridiculous amounts of money into it, where it's now this game won't actually run on any sensible computer.
Called Eve.
Eve Online?
That game is absurd. Like still to this day, people have gone on there and they're going, you are not ready to understand how vast this sandbox is. Like,
or are you thinking Elite Dangerous? Because
no, I don't think they're
both space games. Eve is a very word-heavy managerial. Eve is the one where you actually get to fly around the galaxy.
Fairly confident that's what I'm thinking. But that's what I mean.
That's
like,
Elite Dangerous, is that. Where you can have a ship and fly around the entire galaxy.
Whichever one it is, I can't remember. But the bottom line is they basically have just committed to saying, no, we're going to be in this for the long haul when it comes to greater
but even then,
money requirements, greater whatever.
Sure.
And they're basically just saying the breadth is what we are committing to.
But that's not a problem. But the issue is, and even I've noticed it even in playing this game, that it's like, the closer they get, it's an almost uncanny valley kind of thing, where it's like the closer you get to this level of graphical realism, the more the weird sort of lack of polish stands out. Because the low polygons in Morrowind mean when the character like spins around without actually moving.
Right.
That looks janky, but everything looks janky, so you kind of just accept it. Whereas like in this game, when a character with a pretty well detailed face can't sit down properly without a weird glitch, it's like that does sort of take you out of the experience. And I think that's
like
the issue
is YouTube videos of like the
that's why there's the memes of like Bethesda in real life, where it's people pretending to be Bethesda games because they're famous for making games that look really impressive from a distance, and they've got great like potential.
It's like, let's sit down and eat food, and then like the food's floating over.
But
here
nothing's polished enough, and that's the issue with a game like this. Is the closer you get to achieving a sense of like, oh, this is a really deep, rich, living world. It's like, yeah, but it isn't because that person can't sit,
right? Exactly.
Or it's like that person can't eat, and again. I mean, I have actually been playing this a fair bit since we recorded this originally, but so I've noticed more and more of this as that kind of laid the seed for while I was playing it. It made me notice things that I might not have, is because I was already thinking about like, why is it that this game has gotten retroactive hate? And in a way, it's like, okay, I agree with certain issues where it's like, there's a follower, for example, one of the first followers that you can recruit to join you. it's like, yeah, she's a fun character. And it's an interesting dynamic until you think about it and realize, okay, hang on. She lives in this settlement with her child sister and is willing to just be like, hey, I'll follow you out into the wasteland and probably die. The more you think about it, the more you're like, that doesn't actually make sense. And you have a job in town.
1,000 strangers until I let the wasteland people die.
It's like you have a job.
Silence any child who gets in my way.
You have a job in this settlement and a kid sibling, and you're just gonna leave? Like that doesn't make sense. And that's one of those things where Bethesda doesn't seem to care. They just think, well, yeah, we're gonna have a whole bunch of NPCs, and they're gonna all have names, and you can talk with all of them. And we're not actually going to give them like deep, fleshed out backstories.
NPCs, we like NPCs all over us.
Well, because in New Vegas, your NPCs all had reasonable personalities and reasonable reasons for joining you. And
sure,
like when they joined you, there were actually quests. It's like the more you got to know them, you would actually start doing quests for them. Where it's like they would have their own personal quest that you would do once you reached a certain level of like affinity with them. I think this game has a similar thing, but the quests are much more simpler. It's like, hey, let's go to this place that means something to me.
Right.
And then you do, and then it's like, thanks, that meant something to me. Whoop. Oh, did we have a crash? I don't remember us having a crash. I don't remember anything, as it turns out. I don't know. I was just thinking about it, and I think that... So as the modern world expects greater polish for these games, they've only gotten broader, but they've never added polish. And back in the day, they could get away with it because broad was new, but now people want detail and depth.
Yeah, but
and they've just never caught up with that.
I still argue, though, polish...
You can go too far with it because like Red Dead Redemption 2 is a famous example of
right.
Like, yeah, your horse will defecate at reasonable times and his testicles will shrink in cold.
Right.
It's like, okay, anyone who was looking for that level of detail would probably live out in the wilderness with an actual horse.
If you're looking at a horse's testicles on a game, we got to take you away.
It's like that's too much detail. Whereas I think something like The Witcher managed a reasonable amount of this is the detail that matters.
When they've also the problem is then they sacrifice. If you can manage that, but then you also have a decent gameplay content.
That's the other issue is that they are just famous for glitchy games.
Well, it's not even glitchy. It's just like, okay, what's my purpose? For me, everything's about motivation.
Well, RPGs are... You might just not be an RPG person, though, because RPGs are definitely the kind of games where even I don't always like playing them, because sometimes I'm just like, no, I want a plot to follow. Like, I like the idea of I can just wander around. And in Fallout, that's fun because I like the Fallout world.
Sure. But I'm not even saying, like, I need an actual, like, solid, this is my plot, like, predetermined plot. I'm saying the motivation should, like, for me, in Fallout 3, for instance, when you craft a character to be like, okay, this is kind of what I'm going for, or this is what I'm going for, depending on their personality type or whatever, and then you interact with NPCs,
you're creating your own story is what's fun.
But then when you interact
but if the polish isn't there, your story kind of... You in your mind have to be like, why is it that this character can never sit down properly?
Well, but see,
does she have some form of palsy? My headcanon is that she's got some kind of polio. She can't sit down. That's why she clips into the couch every time she tries to sit on it.
Really bad hemorrhoids. No, I'm just saying, like, but that's about dialogue to me. It's less the polish. It's more like if the dialogue is there.
No, because if they had good dialogue and were still animating jankily, you'd be like, maybe not. Maybe that's just me, because the immersion takes a hit when it's like, but even then, the dialogue can be okay, but I'm like, okay, but you are still leaving your kid sister back in town with the job that you have. Like, unless the dialogue is going to address that.
That's, I guess, what I'm talking about when I say dialogue. I mean,
that's
like
more
story.
Plot, then.
Yeah, plot.
Sure.
And it's got to make sense. There has to be some cohesion, even if there isn't a defined story.
I mean, that depends on what you mean by cohesion, because I would say the Fallout games have cohesion within themselves.
Natural, psychological, and sociological sense.
Well, in some ways, that's another reason why New Vegas was better. And New Vegas, I'll admit, threw me for the beginning, because Fallout 3 succeeded, in my opinion, because it's a very lonely game. It's very I Am Legend-ish, where it's like you're just wandering around alone most of the time.
Exactly.
And I liked that, because that felt Again, it was kind of I Am Legend, where it's like
Right,
you're
just
there's
fishing
like
in the dark,
there's like
son.
maybe a couple hundred people alive in all of this state.
Correct.
So yeah, it makes sense that there's not a whole lot of people. And in New Vegas, it's like okay, there's settlements everywhere, and there's like a quasi government. And I was thrown off. I'm like I wanted to be my lone drifter off in the distance, like. There's too many people.
Right.
Now, I got over that once you start to realize, like, oh, these are actually interesting. Like, the NCR, I actually am like, that's exactly how a government would form.
Right.
Post some kind of apocalypse. It's like, it makes perfect sense.
Yep.
And so it won me over because of how sensible it was.
Well, that's what I mean by psychological and sociological sense. It's got to be something that you go, okay, well, that would actually happen.
Yeah, and see, this is why, I mean, we could get into some of the details now of the game itself, because we're going to come across the Minutemen.
Which I still find their name hilarious.
Well, that's what the original concept of a militia. That was not a. That was the original.
I know, but for me, that term has always just been exclusively just like, and I'm done.
And I feel like you're granting too much. You're letting weirdos make too many of your associations for you. Because that's not that. The historical context predates any sort of what's the entendre context. So
sure,
you're allowing that to supersede if that's your take. I'm just saying, to me, of all of the groups if I were in a place like this, I would be very skeptical of shadowy elite government organizations and/or technological I don't even know what you would call the Brotherhood of Steel. Because they're not a government, but they're I don't know
militia group.
It's not even. They're what I even as a fan of Fallout don't really know what their goal is, other than just like survival, I guess.
It's militia. I mean,
not really, because they don't help people. They just go around collecting old technology and then keeping it to themselves.
So they're
a paramilitary group is the closest thing I can think, but that's not exactly militia, because militia has a social aim, which is why I like the Minutemen, because I'm like, that seems like the most logical solution if you are in this kind of world where you had raiders and bandits and things. Yeah. You would just say, okay, local communities are going to band together and train and learn to fight. And
sure.
I take issue with the kind of analysis of people who say, well, they're just so under-equipped and kind of they're out of their depth, therefore they're not effective. And I'm like, well, those are things you can change, because the ideology behind them still is the most sound.
Right.
I don't know what the Institute or what the Brotherhood of Steel or what the other group, the Railroad, want. I mean, I know what they say they want, but I don't know why they exist.
Well, again, it's a motivation issue.
Whereas it's like, I absolutely understand the idea of, hey, let's protect each other in the settlement. That's kind of one of the, again, we talked about gangs. That's essentially a wholesome form of a mob, of a gang. It's just, we're going to protect our stuff.
Well, that's why
it's
Teamsters is really what you're looking for, is the word.
No, it isn't, but I mean, I know what you're getting at. I would avoid using that word.
Why?
Because they had mob connections. I mean, they were not.
No.
They absolutely did. Why do you think they got bumped?
They've got bumped
Hoffa got bumped because he had mob connections that went south.
They became a mob within themselves.
Well, it's like the argument that, technically unions aren't a bad thing. It's just that they always become a bad thing.
Right, that's what I mean.
So I'm averse to the term.
Sure.
So,
grandfather was a Teamster, and then my other grandfather was a mobster, so what can you say?
And are you sure they weren't the same grandfather?
Yeah, both of them. I'm talking about like on two different sides.
I'm kidding. Well, it wasn't two different sides. It was the one side.
No.
I'm sure they weren't working in cahoots.
Well, that'd be an interesting story, certainly.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm averse to that. I'm just saying.
Turns out the other side of the family has all the money.
The same thing happens in Skyrim when people say, well, the Stormcloaks are dumb because they don't actually have any government plan. They're just like, hey, we want Skyrim because it's our ancestral land. And I'm like, yeah, that's about as good a reason as anybody else has. The Empire has no reason to be here either, other than they want it. Yeah. And so the people who say, well, it's a very utilitarian argument. It's like, I'm just going to side with whoever's got the reasonable amount of power. And I'm like, that's dumb.
It's self-preservation.
Because it makes sense to say, well,
okay, a guy with an K.
He ain't got here killing folks with a couple of pool cues. Except he
Apparently
is.
that guy is.
Yeah, it's like, okay, if your goal was just, well, I want to be with whoever's got the most power, it's like, okay, well, then I can understand why the Brotherhood of Steel appeals, because they've got the cool stuff. But I don't know what they're for, and I don't know what they want. Whereas the Minutemen just want to be left alone. And
You'll
I'm like,
also forever be a cog or a pawn.
Yeah, I mean,
if you think that way,
you could, if you were very nihilistic, you could say the same of the Minutemen and be like, well, you should just be on your own and be your own defense force. And I'm like, okay, that's a great way to get
What
capped.
I'm saying is, when you are after power by using someone else's, you will forever be at the will of that person.
You'll always be dependent on them. Because, it's the same thing with the Stormcloaks, where it's like, ideologically, I support them, and I mean, maybe this is a uniquely American thing, because the one I did see, there was a guy, I think it was either British or some European, he had some kind of European accent, talking about, like, why the Stormcloaks aren't an effective choice for Skyrim, and I'm like, all of his reasons were, like, if you had just changed the names, it would be why the American colonies shouldn't rebel from Great Britain. It's like they have no leadership and they've got no real government plan or even any experience. And I'm like, none of these things stopped us. So why should the Stormcloaks be any different?
Please come back, please.
So I don't know, just that kind of argument.
Used to be a happy country.
That's just a very post hoc argument that I like the role-playing games. I'm absolutely the kind of person who I will make a numerically inferior choice if it feels like it fits the character better.
Right, and that's my point.
It's like, I would side with the Minutemen because they make more sense to me. And even if, well, you're not going to get the cool stuff, you're not going to get you're not going to get the power armor, it's like, well, I don't care.
Yep.
It's like, I am absolutely the kind of person who says, no, I'm going to wear this coat because it looks cooler on my character than the one that's got better stats, because why else? It's a role-playing game. It's not a numbers-playing game.
Correct.
Min-maxers, I understand why, because to them it's more of like, it's more of a challenge where it's like, how much can I fine-tune the system so that I can have the most power? And there's fun in that. But that's not...
there isn't.
It can be, in the sense of like, it can be fun to have, to sort of hack the system such that you've got such a powerful character, because then it just becomes a sort of cathartic fantasy.
But that doesn't exist in real life.
Not really. I mean,
like, you can't...
Strictly speaking, it does, just very, very small percentage. Well, it's like, there's like 1% of people who, they hack the system and they've got everything they could ever want, but that's not how it really works.
But they don't have everything they ever want. They maybe have pursued one particular thing.
They have everything they could conceivably want. They just don't know.
They have everything that they have. No.
I'm not saying that they act. I'm not saying like that it's exactly synonymous. I'm saying like there are people who have. Cohen. Yes, we made that. You made that joke last time.
No, it's still very true.
I don't know. I find that's a metagaming argument to be like, well, this faction doesn't have the cool quests or the cool items, and I'm like, but the character in the game doesn't know that. Like, that's my dividing line, because it's a role-playing game. It's not a numbers-playing game. If I wanted a game where I just wanted to be a powerful character, I'd play something like Doom. And there's a reason why something like Doom is fun. I think we made a comment on how bizarre that ragdoll was. But it's not the reason I like these.
Right.
So, I don't know. The Minutemen I would still probably choose. And the whole point of this of the Minutemen faction is like, you make them effective over time. It's like, they're not effective now, but the whole point is you're going to make them effective.
Well, and that's anything worth starting is worth starting poorly.
Yeah, and that's more interesting than a bunch of technologically superior guys in a little airship showed up, and so we just did what they told us. It's like, that's not the role I want to play. I understand that it makes a certain amount of tactical sense where you'd be like, you and your stones going, well, we're not fighting that thing. Sure, it makes sense, but I don't know. Anyways, I felt like, so does that cover it reasonably in terms of...
As far as Bethesda, I am curious, the people who originally made the Fallout games, are they doing anything?
Well, technically that's Obsidian, although...
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is Obsidian putting anything out recently that has
they made
been new?
A game called Outer Wilds or Outer Worlds. There's two different games. One's called Outer Wilds, one called Outer Worlds. I forget which is which. People have basically called it Fallout New Vegas in space, which I have not played. I did learn that since Fallout 76, Bethesda has basically only been working on the game that just recently came out called Starfield, which is also Fallout in space, from what I gather. So they've really got a type, which they can't seem to get over.
No, they don't have a type. They have a copycat syndrome, apparently.
Well, I mean, Fallout technically is their property, so Fallout in space.
No, I'm talking about the fact that the other company's like, yeah, we're just going to go into space. And they're like, yeah, us too.
Well, everyone's gone to space. You can't, in that case, every game company ever is copying the first game set in space. Which was Atari in 1976. So I
suppose
gaming has only ever been about eventually getting to space somehow. I do also believe that Bethesda produced the indie game. It's not really an indie game because it was made by them, but like it was a very small scale art. What do you call it?
Art Deco.
Art game.
The Art Deco.
Art Deco is a style. It's not a movement.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
an aesthetic style. That's not what I'm talking about. Saying an indie game or an indie movie is a movie made by an independent person with no studio backing. But what would you call like a sort of auteur,
a vignette,
very niche, kind of weird game that comes from a studio but is still definitely like an experimental one-off? Is there a term for that? Because I feel like art...
Well, experimental, I mean...
Yeah, those are often indie movies or experimental movies, but they're not exclusively. So it's like they made...
It's all an experimental game.
So Bethesda made a game which I believe was like made by an internal small group that was basically just like, hey, we're going to experiment with this idea. And I believe I should look it up since I'm not playing the game in this firefight. I can be omniscient for a second.
Omniscient.
Well, in terms of past me, I
would suppose omnipotent,
things.
Maybe, but...
So hang on. I believe they made the game called Hi-Fi Rush, which was a kind of artsy,
you still suck.
Game.
While you're doing it, I'm just playing.
Yeah, it was made by Bethesda. So they did make that, which was well received, but that again was not, I think, a major studio project. I think that was a small team within, and the rest of the team was working on the Starfield game that just came out, and is basically getting reviewed the same way most of their games do, which is, yeah, it's fine. It's got cool ideas, but it doesn't polish them enough. And I guess that's their lot. They seem to be content with that analysis of their stuff. And then, yeah. And then either they make stuff that's only sort of moderately interesting, or they really screw over their fan base. Yeah. So that's why they fell from grace. Is that other companies do what they do better, and they seem to have open contempt for their fans. And so,
well, I mean,
that's unfortunate.
When you don't do the metrics for, yes, future projection is important and all that kind of stuff, but within a company, understanding your demographics is a huge part of what you're supposed to do. I mean, any business school will tell you, okay, you got to understand your market and what your market is after and what you're after within the market. And if you can't get that nailed down, and when it's the scattershot approach where they're like, we're just going to shotgun at everything and hope that something sticks.
I start to... I mean, not that this is an excuse, but there is at least a slight explanation for that, which is gaming companies have done... They're doing what every other game company has done, which is what every Hollywood studio has done, which is...
That's not a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing. It does make sense where they're saying, hey, it's actually getting really expensive to make these things now because people keep expecting more and more spectacle.
Sorry,
therefore, we have to make them...
song on the world's smallest violin.
But the argument is we have to make them as broadly appealing as possible because otherwise we just won't make our money back. That is inevitably going to lead to a crash, and it has led to crashes in Hollywood before where it's like, I forget who I have.
You know why, though, is because the purpose is then shifted.
Yeah, I am not enough of a film buff to prove this argument, but someone basically made the case that Steven Spielberg came along in the sort of 60s, 70s when the biggest Hollywood movies were things like Spartacus and like the really huge historical dramas.
Right.
Like big, enormous battles and those kinds of... I mean, they weren't always historical, but like that kind of... The movies were just getting huge. And he came along, it's like, hey, let's have a film about a shark who kills people. And it was apparently very low budget, very simple.
Right.
And
yet
totally revolutionized film.
Right.
And then that's like that just is a natural cycle of the market, is people start expecting more and more. Studios, in order to try and meet that demand, end up incurring higher and higher costs, which means they have to ensure that they meet those costs, at which point inevitably they start being unable to cope, and then someone comes along and says, hey, what if we go back to just the sort of small independent, or not even independent, but like just small scale, intimate, simple stuff. And if you do that well, it turns out people like it. And that's why the biggest issue is that indie games are separate from the studio space. I mean, I suppose by their definition, indie films are also separate from the studio space, but I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's with film, a film audience will see a film whether it's made by a big studio or by one random guy. I mean, as long as they hear about it, they'll go and see the film, because I think the film experience is different than the game experience, because
I mean, you're not interacting maybe, but
well, I don't know why I'm trying, because the issue I think we have is that the AAA game sector is divorced from the indie game sector for the most part. And so indie games are making the kinds of, here's something real simple made by a few people just because they're exploring an idea that is interesting to them. And so that side of the market is being catered to by those creators. Whereas the AAA are the only ones capable of the massive experiences. So they kind of have to, because the indie space is already meeting the needs of the people who want that stuff. So the only thing the AAA producers can do is AAA stuff, which is.
But what happens is you start as indie, and then you become a AAA, and then you fail to continue being. I'm saying, for the most part, there's a progression that says.
That was true in the '90s. I don't think that's true anymore.
Well, maybe that's just my romantic idea then of what ought to be, because to me, you ought to start as an independent, move up, and go, hey, now I'm really successful because everybody liked my game, so I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. And then what happens is they go, why aren't you guys buying, the same stuff when I'm just putting out the same stuff? And it's like, well, but it's the originality and the execution that was appreciated, not solely the it's people mistake a game's secret sauce as like, we must just replicate this thing exactly repeatedly, and it's like, well, that's
every industry does that. Films do that too,
and I think it's absurd.
But I'm just trying to get
why
to the fact
I mean,
that
we've talked about that
when a film comes out, the average film goer does not care much who makes it, I find. Whereas I think that there is, I mean, maybe I'm projecting, because there's a part of me that feels like when a game comes out, people pay a lot more attention as to who's making it. But maybe that's just the circles that I run into, because I'm the kind of person who pays attention. I'm also the kind of person who pays attention to who makes films. Yeah. Which is not the whole of the market. So maybe most people don't care what games come out, because it's just, hey, a game came out. I don't care who made it. I have a sense that's like there is a divide between the indie and the AAA gaming sectors, where there isn't in the independent and I guess Hollywood-produced films. Because as long as it comes out in a theater, someone's going to go see it, probably. Yeah. Whereas there are people who are like, no, I really only play indie games, and then there's people who say, no, I just want the big AAA stuff.
You're saying you need both, or you?
Well, I'm saying that Hollywood doesn't seem to be as divided starkly the way that the games industry is, where it's like, I mean, the only real divide in Hollywood is, was it made by a studio or not? And technically speaking, a studio's gonna release it even if the studio didn't make it. So a studio's still involved, I guess. So there's not as much of a clear, this is an indie film, this is not. I mean, so long as it's going to come out, as long as it comes out in a theater, no one really notices. Whereas like an indie game, you have to buy probably online, because they're not going to have a physical release.
Or from, one of those.
It's going to be on Steam, it's going to be a download, and it's going to be like the game that the company that made it is going to be the ones directly selling it via Steam.
Right.
Whereas most people go to the theater or to the store to buy a DVD or stream it from some streaming service. And so they're not interacting with the studio, whereas you do directly interact with the studios when you buy a game, because the studio is the one who's selling it. Yes, you're buying it through a platform like Steam, but Steam isn't the one making the games, and everyone knows that. Steam is just where you buy the games.
Right.
I've never noticed that it's actually not a hole in his face. It's just some kind of texture mapping is screwing up. Because the lighting in this room, you'll notice that you can actually see the structure of his face whenever that weird hole happens. But like you can see his nose and his eyebrows when that happens. It's just that they're really dark for some reason. I don't know. I'm not sure I know enough about any of this to really.
I mean, yeah, it's difficult to nail down an industry. You obviously aren't, like, neither one of us are actively involved in that particular industry.
Well,
but
I mean, I'm an involved consumer.
Well,
of the
that's a
game
consumer.
industry.
I'm talking about
keep
like
up with
people that
gaming
actually
news.
actively like are
Well, yeah,
either
but neither I'm not
developers or
involved in
coders or
film
something.
production either. But I still try to sort through some of that stuff when films come out because I'm interested in it.
Yes, but there's only so much criticism you can
That
make
was my
when
chair. If you heard that, I'm not even sure you did.
when there is
I promise.
when there's a lack of
Well, there's going to be
informed
behind the scenes
opinion.
stuff that you can't always
Right,
know.
exactly. And there's probably motivation that you go, oh, that's why that's required, you know, that. So.
I don't know. Oh my, we still got a ways. Oh right, yeah, we still got to do the whole fight with the power armor. I forgot that this was a slightly longer video than normal. Hey, it's Ruptured Elvis.
Old school, pre-war. You might have seen.
Well, you got some.
Not steampunk Elvis. It's not quite there. It's
It's getting there though. Diesel punk is technically
Diesel punk
that's
Elvis.
technically
There you go.
the Fallout genre is more diesel than steam, or technically it's. I don't know if it has a specific name. I've heard it called ray punk or atom punk, where it's like the nuclear fusion.
No, that's
Future
stupid.
stuff. Well, it is because there's nuclear powered cars and stuff. I mean, like that's the reasoning behind all of the fancy technology is that nuclear power progressed to such a degree that you can have like nuclear powered batteries, and so I don't know the various aesthetics of the whoa. It's really glitching out now. The various aesthetics of the quasi punk things. I don't quite get them, but anyways. Well, we got plenty of time. I thought maybe we could stretch this for the full hour and a half, but Bethesda's just not interesting. That's not true. I think the issue is that they just haven't grown with the times appropriately, which is of course evidenced by the fact that anytime something goes wrong, their first instinct is to remake Skyrim.
Well, but that's my
Go
point.
back to the thing that worked.
Well, that
And in fairness, Skyrim is like the third best-selling game in history, so fair enough. I get why they keep redounding to it, but it does show that like that's their pattern. Is like we're kind of stuck in the past.
Well, it's not just their pattern. It's a safe. It's a way of playing it safe that I just find annoying.
Well, and
I
that's
guess
what's funny
about
is that you think
companies.
it's playing it safe, but it isn't because that does get old very quick.
It does, but I just think I'd much rather be behind a game company that takes risks, maybe has some failures, but then also has some great successes. Because if you're doing something original, I'm much more inclined to give you like that wasn't great or it wasn't perfect in this regard or that regard, but wow, what a cool concept that actually was, you know, decently executed or whatever it may be, versus like this let's just make one of those again, and it's like, okay,
Well, in some ways, I think
one
if
of
I were to
these.
be charitable, I would say that maybe you could argue they are still, because even Morrowind and Oblivion, which were or Fallout 3, they were all. I mean, Fallout 3, I suppose, by that point, they were pretty well dominant. But, like, Morrowind was made back in the time when PC gaming was still fairly new.
Right, the whole master
I mean,
race
not
thing
really.
didn't come till...
It had been around for, you know, what, 10-ish? Not quite 10 years at that point? Not quite. I don't know when PC gaming, in the true sense of PC gaming, really took off.
What does that define? What does that look
I don't
like to
actually
you?
know, because, like, gaming, of course, you could stretch it all the way back to the Atari and, like, Pong and those sorts of things.
No, but you said PC gaming.
Well, because I don't know when
specifically.
PC and consoles split. Because, I mean, there was a time when PCs were as niche of a concept as a console, where it's like, it's a thing that does math, and it makes all kinds of weird stuff possible. Whereas, like, eventually, the computer became something that everybody had, and a console was a thing that only did one thing, whereas a computer did everything.
Yeah.
And back in the day, computers were just as niche as consoles. So I don't know when you'd say PC gaming began. But I mean, I know that stuff like Half-Life came out in... boy. I think Half-Life came out in 2000, or Deus Ex maybe, or 1998 might have been Deus Ex. I forget. So maybe PC and Morrowind came out I think in 2002. So basically, PC gaming was still young, less than 10 years old, or maybe up to, I guess. I don't know the history well enough. So even though that's well beloved, it was not a like, oh, this is Bethesda, the guys who have always made, you know, big budget, great stuff. It's like, no, Morrowind was pretty much an indie game of its time, because Bethesda was a fairly small company at that time.
But that's, yeah.
I mean, you can make the case with Oblivion and Fallout 3 that they had reached a degree of commercial success. The problem is they don't seem to have ever morphed into a commercial company. It's like they went from, hey, we are the indie game who made this kind of weird RPG called Morrowind that people liked, and it had much more of the thing you were talking about, where it's like, yeah, we tried something that was, you know, experimental, and it was pushing the boundaries of the technology, and it was maybe a little bit unpolished, but isn't it, you know, it was an interesting idea. The problem is they're now trying, as a multi-million-dollar company, to be like, hey, here's an unpolished experimenter that's just a new idea, and it's like, you don't really have the excuse of being the small little ragtag group of developers anymore. Like, we kind of, if you're gonna be a massive studio, we kind of expect you to perform like one. And I that's, I don't know. I don't know if that's fair, but what else is there to, I don't know. If you want to play with the big boys, you gotta play well, I guess.
Yeah.
I think Bethesda still sort of wishes they were more of a niche company. And, you know, if they were, they could make experimental weird stuff, and then the jankiness we'd let them get away with. But because they're trying to make not that...
Well, that's my point. You have to be one or the other. Yeah, you can't...
I think that maybe that, if I were to be terrible, I'd say that they just haven't quite made that transition properly.
Yeah. Well,
they might still be having the right kind of intentions of just like, we just want to make fun ideas and games, and it's like, yeah, well, then don't pour millions into these kinds of incredible graphics that require modern PCs and all this stuff. Be content to make small things if experimentation is what you want, because that's where experimentation is. You don't experiment with hundreds of millions of dollars of technical development. I mean, I guess you can, but that's quite the experiment, and then that's quite the gamble, which is why they need guaranteed returns. Thus, they have to make it as broadly appealing as possible, which isn't as interesting.
Yeah. It's a trade-off for sure.
A giant dinosaur. And there's still quite a lot of this video left, actually. Well, maybe not quite a lot.
It is
10-ish
a
minutes?
trade-off. 10-ish minutes? No, that looks more...
Oh, 20 minutes. I was misreading. I thought it was a... Never mind. Well, this is longer than I thought. And I guess it took us a little bit longer to get things set up than I thought that it would, because I thought I had done all the pre-setup that I needed, but evidently not so. Well, which follower would you romance? Are you even aware of the followers in this game?
Not specifically.
Well, then that's a question that won't go anywhere. I guess, well, because we kind of already talked about the factions. Do we agree on the whole... Would the Minutemen name throw you off enough that you wouldn't want to be a part of it?
No, I'm not that trite.
Then why'd you bring it up?
I think it's a funny name, but I certainly wouldn't be like, simply because your name is weird, I wouldn't align myself with you. That's just... Well,
yeah.
Be like, they certainly cannot... They cannot claim that they don't prematurely shoot their load.
Well, they can claim it. The question is how true it is. Yeah.
Anywho.
Well, so you agree, and that goes nowhere. How about New Vegas?
I have yet to play that one all the way through with you.
Well, but you've seen the factions, though. You know of them, surely, because there's not that many in that game.
Yeah.
Because essentially, it's like you can either join the Legion, who are stupid, or the NCR, who are flawed but doing as best as anyone could, or Mr. House, who's sort of whatever. Or you could join your own team, which I kind of appreciate that option. This game, I don't think really has that option, unfortunately.
Maybe
it does. Maybe it does. Maybe you don't have to pick a side,
that much of a lone wolf, I suppose.
I was in My first playthrough of Fallout New Vegas, because I had deliberately chosen to go with like a super high charisma character, I was like, I want to see if I could get away with the smarmy manipulator rather than just the brutal gunslinger. And so when the option came up was like, hey, you could double cross Mr. House and take over New Vegas, I was like, that does seem like something that would fit this sort of character archetype.
So I did.
Well, yeah, that was my first playthrough. I also sided with the NCR, and I probably tend to side with the NCR most times if I ever do a replay. Because, again, people talk about the NCR, it's like, yeah, but they're corrupt and they're spread too thin, and I'm like, this is all metagaming and I don't care.
Yeah.
They provide water to the town. I don't care who's doing that. I'm going to side with the guys who are, like, keeping a relative amount of cohesion.
Where do your allegiances lie? With the highest bidder. I have a ship, but that makes you the highest bidder. It's a little bit like, well,
I'm
yeah.
not quite going to that degree.
Well,
because
but
the Legion, like, were just a whole bunch of despicable whacks. I can't take anyone seriously who does an unironic Legion playthrough. Like, if you're just doing it because you're like, hey, I want to play all the various factions and see what they're like. But if you're like, no, I agree with Caesar, I'm like, you're a whack, and I wouldn't want to interact with you in the apocalypse. I'd shoot you in the apocalypse. If I had to deal with you, I'd be like,
our interaction will be very brief.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, sorry. In the killer be
Your
killed.
time on this earth is very brief.
Yeah, so I don't know. I just, again, it's metagaming in my opinion to be like, well, the NCR are corrupt and they're spread too thin. I mean, in that criticism is present within the game where people say like, yeah, they're not the perfect government, but they are the only government that's like, yeah, the roads are relatively safe and we have food and drinking water. It's like, we've got jobs. That makes a certain degree of sense. Or the house option makes sense where it's like, okay, or you could side with the guy who's literally got all the money in the area. Again, that feels a little bit like allying yourself with just, well, whoever's going to pay my bills, but I mean,
It's a
House also does have he's got a certain libertarian ideology, which I can get behind, where I'm like, okay, sure, fair enough. It's not just because he's the guy in charge, it's that he's the guy in charge that I at least agree with.
Yeah, but that's
somewhat.
still a lot of power within one kind of.
Well, yeah, but I mean, he at least there's actually a point at which you're talking to him about like, what are you gonna do with New Vegas once you gain control of the dam? And he's like, well, I'm just gonna be in charge. And I think you one of the dialogue options is you could be like, well, that means what? You're just gonna be some kind of dictator? And he's like, well, no, I prefer the term autocrat. It's like, well, at least he's honest. Sure. I'd rather work for the guy who's an honest. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess autocrat, if that's the term he wants. It's like, at least he's being upfront about it rather than like, no, I'll work for your good while lining my boots. I don't know. If I describe the followers to you, could you pick out of a hat which one of them sounds like the one you'd be interested in?
Sure.
No, that's a stupid. I thought you had maybe at least seen some of the like, if you've seen clips of people playing it or something.
I have not much, no.
I don't know. I guess the question is, do you go for the tough? Would you go for the tough, like, independent chick who can hold her own but who's kind of a jerk, or the more kind of soft, I just want to help people because I'm so altruistic and I'm not all that effective?
Why would chicks? I mean,
well, okay, in the romance sense, I said romance.
Sure.
There's followers that you can't romance. Actually, I don't know if that's true. I think there are some that you can't, but there's a lot of followers that are just followers, and then there's some that I think that you can actually.
Altruistic sense versus the what?
Versus like the tough, keeps herself alive, but is kind of a jerk chick.
But see, if I.
The thing is, you're at a disadvantage because the tough keeps herself alive chick is also Irish in this game. You're like, oh,
that makes it hard.
It makes it hard.
No, all right, I'll do the dishes.
Tell me how useless I am. I don't know. I'm just not that whole character trope of like, that's a thing that I'm not into.
What is the thing?
That whole character type. Of
being
like
the Irish are just very
of being Irish.
No, I'm saying just that the Irish are very like just.
Oh, okay, no, I'm not talking about the Irish. It's incidental that she's Irish.
Well, okay, I'm
saying that character type of the. The trouble is that only the Japanese have a word that I'm aware of,
which
which is going to make me sound like a weeb for knowing it.
you are a weeb. Just admit it.
I'm a closet.
You're a closet weeb.
Well, here's the thing, I guess, that annoys me about that term is I have to sort of agree, if only because weeb has sort of become a useless meaning. It's in the way that, like, gamer used to be a fairly niche term, where it's like you're the people who play games a lot.
Yeah.
And that was sort of a personality thing. It was like that. It was a niche enough activity that made you weird.
Right. Now.
Whereas now, and weeb used to mean like you're a bit of the weird anime obsession, where it's like now if you just watch anime at all, that's like apparently that makes you a weeb. And I'm like, okay, I guess that means I'm a weeb if that's the how low the bar is.
If that's the qualifier.
But I mean, I've watched like maybe a dozen in my life, so I don't think that should count, but I guess whatever. But it's the whole tsundere concept of like I like you, but I'll never tell you that because it just comes across as insecure to me. It's like I'm tough and sassy, but that hides the fact that I'm actually, I like you, but I won't tell you, and I can't ever admit my own whatever it is. I just don't quite jive with it. Are you would the femme fatale aspect still win you over in that context, or? Because to me, I'm just like, no, can we just be honest? Can you just get over yourself? Because all it comes across as is like you've got to stick up your bum.
Yeah, in this context, I would say I'd want to... I
want to jump them first.
I would overlook the rough exterior, I suppose.
You're basically just going, I need someone who I can trust to...
Kind of.
Well, but here's the thing is that in the gameplay itself... That doesn't really come up, like the sort of, I'm just innocent and want to help people. She can kill people just as easily. She just doesn't seem to revel in it as much. Like if they actually,
so she's what's her name from Castlevania? She's
sure.
What's her name?
Cypher or Sypha, I think it is technically. Sure, I guess that's actually probably reasonably.
It's a reasonably good comparison. It's like, yeah, I want to help you, but I'll eviscerate your bones if you cross me.
Sure, not quite to that degree, but I mean, I don't think there's a stat difference. Maybe there is that I just am not aware of, but they both seem perfectly capable in combat. So
see that's I think would be the only question, because as far as my preference,
yeah, but see, I'm not a.
But
we're not touching
a masochist.
But we're not just talking about I said specifically romance, not just work with.
Right.
So in that context, it's like
I'm not a masochist.
No, but I'm saying. Oh, I thought you were saying you would go with the more effective in combat.
No, I'm saying if that's not a factor.
Well, sure. I mean,
to
if you were to hire one of them to be like, hey, just travels and we'll keep each other alive.
I'm not even saying that. Like within a romance context, even for me, it is important to say.
Even in a relational concept, even if you took that out of it, like I wouldn't want to be friends with you.
In a relational context, in any capacity, I want people that are capable with me. That in a non-violent manner that can get into the trenches with me, if that makes sense.
But what if that person was the only? What if the a-hole person was the only one who did that?
That's where I go. I'd rather have that than somebody who's like, I'd love you for you, and I'm just mousy though, and I can't ever lift a shovel. It's like, no.
Well, if they made that part of the character, I'm sure I might have thought the same thing.
That's my point. Like it's like I can't.
There's got to be a spectrum in between there, though.
Well, in the ideal sense, yes, that's what you're going for. You want a lady on the street, but a freak in bed.
Wow. That's not even part of the context we were bringing up.
No, but I'm saying it's the idea of like, sure, you want somebody that can get like grit underneath.
Surely that would be the opposite, though.
Then...
If you're killing people in the street but nice, you're a freak in the street but you're nice at home.
No, but I mean, you want them to be able to cook you a good meal but still play grit ball if they need to.
Okay.
But
I don't know if that was a euphemism or not.
It's the Medea reference. You wouldn't. It's
sure. I don't care.
She's talking about throwing hot grits on an abuser and smacking him with a frying pan. It's
okay. Sure.
Anyway, my point is, I want. The Irish thing really tips the scales. No.
Well, I actually will admit, I was siding with and I still will. I don't know why I'm defending myself for the future of the playthrough that I'm not playing through right now. Like, I swear I'm not cheating. It's just that she's more effective at combat. But I would, because I like.
Is that what they're calling it nowadays? Combat. What are you doing in there? We're combating.
That's awful. So I like. I find.
Combating.
I'm just gonna. Apparently, this conversation can't be had.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So far, I have not met all the companions yet, but obviously the Piper is her name, the first of the companion. I think she's actually the first that you can truly recruit, because I think the other ones come along later. It's like she's a fun character and whatnot, but then when I did get to the Irish character, I was like, they did make her just more attractive also.
Well,
And she's got the Irish accent. I'm like, that does make it hard. But
I
also
feel like that's
but
a
you're
little
just a little
heavy-handed.
unhinged. Like, yeah,
but isn't that very Irish? I mean, like, no offense for anybody that's Irish. I am also, so don't.
Well, you can't. The Irish won't believe you if you tell them that. That's one of the things they say. If you ever go to Ireland, and even if you do have Irish ancestry, don't talk about it, because they'll be like, "You're not freaking Irish. Get out of here."
Well, I'm not suggesting that I'm a thoroughbred Irish. It's like,
I don't know. I have heard that they're kind of like, "No, you ain't. Get out of here, you yank."
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you can't claim it like somehow it's. But I'm just saying that kind of comes with the territory.
I don't know. That's the kind of thing that I do think would just get old. Where it's like, can you just be honest about yourself? This whole facade.
The angsty thing, I
Well,
think,
it's not even inherently
would get
angsty.
old.
It's just
It's
the kind of.
It is angsty. It's like I don't know what I'm feeling.
No,
I can't.
see, it's not that. It's not that
I
they
gotta
don't know. It's
brood
more that they're just
and-
like they're just. I don't know what it is that puts me off about it. It's just like, can you just be honest about yourself, or because I don't think it's that it's like, oh, I don't know.
This is going to get a little more like serious. I'm taking this in a very
Okay,
Counselor
you chose
Troy.
the wrong time because we got 6 minutes
I'm
left.
taking this in a very Counselor Troy direction.
Oh, thank you.
Is it an intimacy question as far as like not sexually, but
Not
like,
even, because-
like is it like I want somebody that
if you
can actually
romance-
have a hard conversation,
If you
or is it,
romance the characters, like obviously, because I've watched several people play through this game, so I've seen most of what the various different character options are, and it's like, yeah, you eventually reach the point where it's like, yeah, you can have your conversations, and they'll admit that's like, yeah, I like you, and I got whatever, and it's just like, there's still a part of me that's like, why all the fuss? Couldn't we just cut through? Maybe angst is the right word, but I don't know. Because it's not angst I view with sort of teenage just stupidity. Angst, I don't know, maybe there's more of just the... There's an element of just like, why put up a front? Because that's what it is. It's a front. If it's
Putting
just your
on
personality,
airs.
where you're just genuinely kind of like rough around the edges, then that's just a personality thing. But if you're rough around the edges to conceal your more tender
well, then you're
underside,
not
then I'm
actually
like,
rough around the edges. You're just putting
you
on
are, 'cause
it's a persona,
it's
though.
specifically the edge. Well, yes, the edges implies not the center.
Oh, sure.
Like if you're just kind of rough and tumble, like I actually would get along better with that.
Watch me tumble.
Maybe the argument is that that's more of what the Kate, the Irish character.
But it's disingenuous to a degree.
Maybe not. It depends. Maybe if the people who have done it are like, no, you go through these quests and she's
Okay, so if
maybe it's just her actual character.
I'll say it
but
this way.
I am skeptical of those people because there's a part of me that wonders,
Yes.
is this a front?
Right. And here's this is my final thoughts on the matter. For me,
She's Irish. I'm going with it anyways.
I would rather have somebody that is very soft-spirited, wants to be, hey, let's work things out and things like that. But if crossed, would be like, no, I'll lay you out. Rather than somebody who presents themselves like, what? I'll lay anybody out that needs to be laid out, and then
I'll kick my own butt.
yeah, it's like, and then later comes down to like you're actually just a softie. I'm like, I'd rather have the soft be the presentation,
Yeah,
and then
I'm more-
like, yeah, no, but seriously,
here's
she'll
the
cut
thing.
you.
Well, I guess they say, and this might be, I wonder if this is more of the feminine thing, because they talk a lot about this in, like this, the way to make yourself interesting to, attractive
like
to a
the-
woman is to be like, it's the sort of dichotomy of like, oh, to have an external and an internal appearance. and that it's attractive, where it's like, oh, you know, they have this appearance on the outside, but they're really this way on the inside. I feel like men are the exact opposite, where it's like, no, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
I just want one person. I don't want to date multiple people.
Yeah, that's
Can
true.
I just date one? Because that's my opinion. It's just like, I don't know.
Well, I'm not even suggesting that this can't be mysterious. Like, I think there's a degree of, again, the enigmatic kind of, okay, I don't know everything that she's thinking, that kind of a vibe. But I want that to be sweet still.
I'm not sure that I have that. I think the funny thing is that I'm sure
it comes back down to that gameplay thing of,
well,
like,
maybe,
the
and this
social
is, but
gameplay
here's
of,
the
like,
thing
the
that I
flirtation
do have to recognize.
enjoy.
And anyone, I mean,
If you're wanting to date him.
send in your application to. If there's a part of me that says I do have to recognize the introspective part of me is going, the reason that you probably don't want that is because you are that. There's a part of me that's like, I'm already plenty reserved enough for the both of us, so I don't need to be dealing with you being reserved, because I'm already very much like that way, so then it'll just be two stone statues trying to have a conversation. So I recognize that there's probably a degree of projection. I'm like, no, how about you cut to the chase, because then I don't have to deal with you. I don't want to date myself, I guess is my point. Some people would want to date themselves. I don't think I would.
Well, okay, so what are you saying that says about me? I'm confused.
Dude, would you want to date yourself, or would you want to date someone else? The video's technically... Oh, no, the video's not over. I was going to give you the out, but the video's not over yet, so you don't have to...
No, I mean...
You do have to answer this for the next 1 minute and 30 seconds.
I wouldn't want to date somebody exactly like me. I think that playing the social game of flirtation and kind of I don't like when the game is just nil. When it's like, nah, I just want to basically cut to the chase.
I just want to jump your bones.
Well, it's like the Effie brace yourself. Like, that bothers me. Like, even in the bedroom, no. It's like, but I
want to know.
Mean, no, but I'm just saying, like, in a general context, I just think. Yeah, I mean, you just don't. You don't just do that. It's a nuance.
But I also, I can agree with that sentiment. But that's one extreme. It also doesn't have to be like you have to start in the morning by putting on the right perfume.
No, exactly. I'm not wanting to be like a French wine where you got to warm them up a little bit before you get the... I mean, it's like, no, no.
I want straight whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, there is a time. It's a timing, I think, issue too. But
okay, well, this is not the thrust of what I was getting into.
That's an interesting word to use.
It's all the subtext. It's getting to me. My point is on a personality level. If I'm not trying to get to you're the one taking it straight to the bedroom. I'm just saying, I don't know, perhaps I think I recognize that I'm plenty cagey enough for the both of us. I don't need somebody else being cagey around.
Well, yeah, I mean,
perhaps that's my own self-reflection of like, I would rather someone who balances me than just more caginess. Oh, there
correct.
we go.
Well, it's like to prevaricate in addition to your prevarication is like, that's too much. I'm not even saying, because I don't want somebody exactly like me, but I think, I suppose as a person, I'm fairly...
Perhaps let's get real deep here. Freudian within Freudian. Don't think about that too much. Perhaps you might make the argument that the more gruff with the sort of heart of gold, that kind of character concept, I'm trying to formulate, because I feel like I'm trying to explain myself in a way that's not it's not going to take forever, psychologically speaking. But there's an element of like, if you are that kind of person with like, okay, the rough exterior, but actually you are more genuine, I feel like you would seek out not a rough exterior. The same thing. You would just be like, hey, the rough exterior guards the genuine. I want the genuine, so I don't want you to have the rough exterior.
Correct.
I would rather you have the genuineness, because then I don't need the rough exterior anymore. Because in some ways that's just a cultural mechanism.
It's the grace to Tommy kind of a thing, yeah.
Grace. See, I didn't like that relationship.
And I didn't like Grace either, but I think, but see, this is what I'm saying. What's her name?
Mob lady, horse lady.
Yeah.
That's all she's known by now.
She could actually play the game a little bit with him. But again, that's the psychological kind of flirtation that says, I know it's not even a rough exterior as much as it is like,
that I would say is
you
genuine.
want me. I know you want me, but I'm not going to give you me.
Yeah, but I feel like that was more genuine, where it's just like, the whole Tommy with the rough exterior and the soft underneath, I'm like, I don't think that fits by the end of the series. I think that basically goes away after season 1. Because he's so committed to the rough exterior that the soft underneath goes away. I actually feel like that's the plot of the show, is that he gets so wrapped up in his own machinations that he basically entombs himself in his own coping mechanisms.
That's true. Yeah.
So that's where I just go. It's like episode or season 3 when the horse trainer lady gets introduced. By that point, it's like, forget the soft exterior. You are this way, and she's that way. So that's just compatibility.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's like, oh, I'm only rough to conceal my tenderness, then I'd be like, well, then you wouldn't want someone rough. You'd want someone.
No, that's true.
Because then hopefully the roughness is something you're trying to shed.
Right. Whereas if you are a bit of a pushover, then you tend to be like, you want the German swim team. You want Olga to come in and be your rough exterior.
Well, in some ways, that's why I actually think that there is an element of like the people who are interested in the whole, I want the boss chick. I'm like, I don't.
That means that you are a type B.
It means that I am firm in my masculinity.
No, I'm saying, I'm not talking about you. I'm saying if you want oftentimes it's like, if you want the boss chick, that means you're an alpha. It's like, no.
That actually probably means you're not.
Yeah, exactly.
It means you're coping for something.
It means you're probably a simp.
I won't.
Maybe a little strong.
That doesn't fit. I mean, that might, there's an overlap, but I think that there isn't. I would say that to bring out a Jordan Petersonism, because of course, I would say that is a form of like, that's your subconscious it's attracted to things you know you need.
Right.
So it's like you're seeking out someone who is more dominant's not the right word, disagreeable than you, because you probably recognize that you're not as disagreeable as you need to be.
You're too agreeable, yeah.
Whereas I suppose perhaps maybe that's me with my absolute zero agreeableness, where I'm like, no, I need someone more agreeable, because otherwise we'll just be two a-holes walking around.
Well, and I guess I'll end with this. The notion to me of competence within a man, because I think, again, Jordan Peterson talks about like the whole alpha beta thing is a little bit like overplayed, but I think
it's not even true in wolves either.
Right, that's what I mean.
Like the guy who developed that theory spent the rest of his life being like, no, I think I was wrong, and everyone was like, no, we like it too much.
And
the alpha wolf image is too powerful.
But the stigma, certainly.
No, but it's like he tried to make their argument for the rest of his life. It's like, no, I think I got the pack structure of wolves wrong, and everyone was like, no, we're sticking with the alpha beta concept.
Right. But the notion to me that a strong and confident man, again, competence-wise, is going to look for a competent woman who represents feminine qualities, not like if you're presenting a masculine exterior, it's like, no, that's not attractive to a masculine man.
This is the issue of modern
culture. And
culture.
I'm sorry if you're a feminist,
you should never listen to a woman tell you what a man wants, because she doesn't know. She knows what she wants, and what she wants is a man. She's going to tell you to be a man. It's like, if you want to know what men... It's a similar thing. I don't think you should listen to guys who tell you what women want, because they're just going to be like, well, here's what... Basically, they're just going to tell you what projection they're thinking.
Right.
It's like, no, they're just going to tell you... Either they're going to be defending their own a-holishness, or they're going to be the male feminists who are like, they want sensitivity and all this. It's like, no, they don't. That's what you want.
Right.
You, in wanting a woman, have become a woman.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the problem with the whole, like, androgyny that we are getting now is this.
You know what your version of a woman is a lot like? A guy. You could have stayed a guy if you were going to be an a-hole about it.
What's the whole... It's the... Yeah.
Well,
It's
Just gave up.
We're gonna continue to just
Well, we probably should
pontificate on
probably
this
cut
on-
this off before it gets social justice.
because the bottom line is, if you get into feminism, we're gonna have to take it away.